Tonight it is my pleasure to introduce our friend Dr. Alan Berger. We're continuing our series of workshops on the theme of emotional sobriety. Dr. Berger will speak to our group on the first Monday of each month throughout the year. We are so lucky. Tonight is the fourth part of his discussion of how we can apply the 12 essential insights for emotional sobriety to our recovery and growth in our programs. Alan recently celebrated 50 years of sobriety. I understand it's almost 51 now, using the 12 steps, and over 40 years as a practicing psychotherapist specializing in addiction recovery with an emphasis on emotional sobriety. Dr. Berger brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to us each month in his presentations that are then followed by a Q&A discussion. As I said before, Alan's going to be talking about insight number 4 from his book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. It's a must read. That's my opinion. That fourth insight is, in case you don't know it off the top of your head, knowing that it's not personal. Whoops. Alan, come and explain that.
Well, thank you, Susie, and thanks for the warm welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you and Patrick and the rest of the group. I too look forward to meeting with you once a month. I get to see you and Patrick more often than that, which I'm glad for. The Thursday night group, and all of that will be posted. And look, my good friend Bruce Iverson's in the house. Bruce, good seeing you, my friend. Bruce is one of the old timers that has come around when I first started talking about emotional sobriety. So it's great to have you join us, Bruce. It's always good to see your face. So what we're going to talk about today, in fact, I'm going to share my screen now, is the fourth insight from my book on the 12 insights for emotional sobriety. And I'll just talk a little bit about the inspiration of this book. As a lot of you know, Herb Kagan and I are partners in crime. We do a lot of co-facilitating workshops on emotional sobriety. I brought this topic to Herb over 20 years ago. And I said, look, I think this is the best kept secret in the program. And I think we need to start to flush this out and talk about it and see if we can help Bill's hope and dream that this would be spearhead the next major development in recovery, become a reality. And so we started by putting together some workshops, and we'd get 20 people showing up and 30 people showing up. And, before COVID hit, we were holding workshops and 150, 200 people would show up for a day-long workshop with Herb and I in Southern California and in various other cities in California. So I'm really glad to say that I've just loved this journey with him. And through those years, we started to put together an idea of what is the unfolding of our consciousness that occurs, and what is the path that follows. So that's what inspired me to write the 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. And so we're going to be digging into, like I said today, the fourth insight. So there's the book. It would be good, if you don't have it, is to read the insight before I talk about it and then to read it again afterwards. There's a lot of great clinical examples in this book that really illustrate how I work with this in a clinical setting. But I think you'll see the application to your own life, shortly as we dig into this. Well, this is Fritz Perls. I'm a trained Gestalt therapist. Gestalt therapy was part of what we call the third force in psychology, which was humanistic psychology that that showed up on the scenes in the early 60s. And it was a very different way of looking at people and helping people and working with people, that up to that point in time, everything was very much influenced by psychoanalysis, psychodynamic theories. And the third force came along and says, maybe we've got an overemphasis on the past, and we need to pay attention to what people are doing right now in their lives today. And so this whole approach to working with people is very much a present-centered approach. It doesn't exclude our past, but it says our past is showing up in what we're doing now. And the way to work with it is to become aware of what we're doing now and experiment with new possibilities. Well, Fritz had a great way of describing emotional maturity that made a lot of sense to me. He described it as the transcendence from environmental support to self-support. Well, let me just briefly say what that means, because we're going to apply this same idea to emotional sobriety. Environmental support is based on our dependence on our environment for our survival and our emotional well-being. We all start our journey in life completely dependent on our environment to be okay. In our mother's womb, we get oxygen provided to us through the umbilical cord. We get nourishment provided to us. We get safety. We are in this amniotic fluid that kind of provides a cushion. We have our own personal Uber. She'll take us wherever she goes, and we don't even get charged for it. So we get transportation free. So all of that is, we cannot, in the early stages of our life, support our own life. We cannot support ourselves. We have to develop neurologically and physically and biologically to a certain degree to live independent from our mother. Now, that usually occurs around 9 months. Today, if a child is born prematurely, with the advances in medicine, we can support a child that doesn't spend much time in the womb at all, which is quite surprising. But if we, go to full gestation, the minute we're born, we start learning to support ourselves. And what's the first thing that happens? Well, as soon as the umbilical cord is cut, what do we have to start to do to take care of ourselves? We need to breathe. We need to inhale and exhale. We need to oxygenate ourselves. We need to support our life with breathing. That's why breathing, when you go into all of these different self-help groups and even dealing with a certain approach to dealing with anxiety, yoga, it's all about breath work, right? It's all about being able to breathe in a way to support ourselves. Now, that self-support continues on. We are wired to move towards becoming whole. Becoming whole means supporting yourself. That's our growth. I also think you can think of it as a process of differentiation. We're coming from being completely fused with mother to now becoming our own person, becoming differentiated from mother. Well, that continues our whole life. Now, biologically, physically, that unfolds, automatically. At around the age of a year, we start to want to walk. Nobody has to tell you to do that. You want to do that because it becomes a possibility for you. So we have a tendency to actualize what is possible. That is hardwired in us to move us towards what we can be. People like Maslow called it self-actualization. Kurt Goldstein talked about it as self-actualization. That's a very, very powerful instinctual force. Emotionally, it's a bit more challenging to grow into or to be able to support ourselves. Today there's a lot of talk about needing a certain kind of an attachment when you're growing up. And if you have that attachment, then you're able to do it better. But the truth of it is no one is able to support themselves well emotionally. We still become incredibly dependent on our environment to be okay. And that's where the problem lies. And that's where emotional sobriety comes in. So we can think of emotional sobriety as a process that transcends a consciousness of emotional dependency, moving us towards a consciousness of emotional freedom. So emotional sobriety transcends that consciousness of emotional dependency and moves us towards a consciousness of emotional freedom. So one way of thinking about emotional sobriety is as emotional freedom, or as we talked about in the Thursday night group last week, the emotional sobriety meeting, it's autonomy, right? We are becoming an autonomous individual. Doesn't mean that we don't need our environment, because we will always need to be in relationship to. It's just that we take responsibility to get what we need from our environment instead of being passive about it. Well, this is a very important thing. So in order to transcend our emotional dependence, we have to, there's no way around this. We have to become aware of how our behavior is determined by the gravitational forces created by this, what Bill Wilson called almost absolute dependence. I like to think of it as an almost absolute emotional dependence. He uses this phrase in the 1956 letter that he wrote that was published in the 1958 Grapevine. And hopefully somebody will put in the chat a link to this letter, because if you have not read this letter, please print out a copy of this letter and read it many, many times and underline the stuff that stands out for you, because it's a seminal piece of literature in recovery. In the big book, Bill wrote this. He says, if his arrangement, talking about the alcoholics now, if his arrangement would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great, right? Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful, right? This is the idea that drives so many of us crazy, is that if people or life would just conform to our expectations, we could live this wonderful life. And don't people realize that these ideas we have, that this is just the right way to be? I mean, that's how we rationalize it. That God, if people would just, wake up and do the right thing. Now, the right thing means do what I want them to do. Now, you got to understand this. We're very tricky, because we hide our arrogance by talking about things like, well, if they would just do the right thing, as though we have this special status and we understand what the right thing for everybody is to do. Does it sound like we're playing God? Well, yes, because we are, aren't we? We are playing God. He went on to say in step 12, our demand for emotional security, this is in the 12 and 12, by the way, our demand for emotional security for our own way had constantly thrown us into unworkable relations with other people. Our demand for emotional security for our own way had constantly thrown us into unworkable relations with other people. Though we were sometimes quite unconscious of this, the result had always been the same. Well, what was the result? What were the results of this behavior that, you should do what I expect you to do? Well, when people wouldn't go along with that, we would become disillusioned. And if we didn't work with our disillusionment, then we would become nihilistic. Life sucks and then you die, that kind of an attitude. We'd feel a lot of disappointment in our relationship. We'd be frustrated, we'd be angry, feel anxiety, depression, hopelessness, controlling. We'd experience that pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And that's in recovery. That's not saying because of our alcoholism, but because of our demand that things should be a certain way. Fred Holmquist, a dear friend of mine, called this sober suffering. I like that. And of course, this is one of the leading causes to people going back and out and drinking or using again. It causes relapse. So this consciousness of emotional dependence creates this, it's all about me syndrome, right? It's all about me. Now, what does that mean? Well, we make everything about us. I believe that here in Western culture, that it's a culture of narcissism. is we're constantly focused on what does this mean for me? I don't mean narcissism in the pathological clinical sense. I just mean an over focus on self. We make everything about us because our emotional well-being is dependent on how others think and feel about us. We are hyper focused on the way they treat us and how they think or how we think they feel about us. The more interdependent we are, the more we will take what they do personally. Now, you've got to understand that the more important a person becomes to you, which means the more interdependent you will become on that person, the more you're going to take things personally, the more challenges and trouble you're going to have in that relationship, the more disturbances you will feel. Unless your ability to hold on to yourself is equal to the degree of importance a person has to you. If that's the case, you're going to neutralize this. But not many of us are differentiated or mature to that point of view, or to that level, I should say. Dr. David Snarch, a wonderful book called Passionate Marriage, called this a reflected self-image. And a reflected self-image is a result of the meaning we give to the behavior directed towards us. It creates a reflected sense of self. So what we do is we conclude based on how a person is treating us, how they feel about us. So if you're not treating me well, it means you don't like me. If you're short with me, it means you don't respect me. If you get mad and you call me names, it means you don't respect me. I mean, we take it all personally. As we're going to see, I think it's important for us to look at that from a different perspective. So what are the signs of the "it's all about me" syndrome? Well, our self-esteem is other validated. We look to other people and how they treat us to determine how to feel about ourselves. It creates an "I'm okay if" consciousness mentality. I'm okay if Susie smiles at me when I come into the meeting or acknowledges me. I mean, my God, what would happen if I showed up and Susie didn't introduce me? How would I deal with that? See, is it I'm okay if Susie says the things I want her to say? Well, there was a time when that would be true. Now Susie has a lot more room. She could pretty much say anything she wants and I'd still love her. You know, that's not dependent on that anymore. I'm not dependent on her being a certain way to feel the way I feel about her. There's a disrespect for differences when it's all about me, because when I demand people do things the way I want them to, there's no room for them to be different than what I want and what I think I need. We believe that the way someone is behaving is a reflection of how they feel about us. This is that reflected sense of self that Dr. Snarch referred to. Protecting others from our feelings or thoughts. See, if we take things personally and see this as a reflection of how they feel, then we've got to be careful with how we act towards others, because we think other people are behaving the same way and feeling the same way we are. So we don't dare say certain things because of how it might impact somebody. So it creates an incredible inauthenticity, disingenuousness in our relationships. We think that they can't cope with an authentic relationship because the truth is we don't know how to cope. You see, it's important to understand the golden rule is that we treat other people the way we treat ourselves. We project on others that they're dealing with things in the same way we are, so therefore we treat them in the same way we treat ourselves. This causes a lot of difficulties, especially the more immature we are, the more I'm going to dump my crap on you. We blame ourselves for the behavior of others. We attempt to control the people in our lives to get them to do what we think we need them to do for us to be okay. We become incredible at mind reading or mind mapping and trying to figure out what this other person is doing and how they're feeling. And we become very intrusive and we start telling people what they feel and what their motives are. And we attribute our disappointment sometimes to being punished by God. That's taking things personally and taking our relationship with God very personally. This is one of my heroines, Dr. Virginia Satir. She was a brilliant psychotherapist, and she says, we are always trying to get out of our emotional jail. Mostly we try by begging, by threatening or pleasing other people, trying to get them to do it for us. So if I believe you hold the key to my jail, then I am dependent on you opening up the jail cell, the door to the jail, to set me free. Well, if I'm dependent on you, I don't have a consciousness of freedom. It's a consciousness of dependency. Now I've got to be focused on what you are or are not doing. So as I said, this emotional dependency, and last month when I came on, I started to talk about, how does this emotional dependency shape our consciousness? I'm not going to go into all of the ways other than highlight two of them, but I'd encourage you to go back and listen to the presentation I gave last month if you weren't here. So this consciousness of I am okay if, right? It's a consciousness that's based on contingency. My well-being is contingent on situations, people being a certain way. So this generates a ton of unenforceable rules about how you have to behave if you love me. We consciously and unconsciously manipulate our partner to do what we want them to do, falsely believing that our sense of self is dependent on how they are with us. We put expectations in our relationships to meet all our needs and to make us whole. And we love immaturely. Our love is based on need, not on choice. Very big difference. So I think we're ready for that. Was kind of our warm up, our foreplay. And now we're ready for insight number 4. Are you ready, Susie? Susie, you're muted.
I'm ready, except someone has asked me, and frankly, I was doing some research for you. They asked me the name of the syndrome that you were talking about, and I can't
It's
pull
all
it out
about
of.
me syndrome. It's all about.
Oh, I should have known that intuitively. Huh? Shoot.
Yeah, it's all about me syndrome.
Thanks.
All right, so here we are, insight number 4. Now, the insights leading up to this in my book, where the first one is waking up, right? We have to realize that we've been sleepwalking through our lives. It's the way we say it is that all of the conditioning that we go through from our culture, from our family, creates kind of like, it turns us into an automaton. We just do what we do without giving much thought about what's going on. There's not a lot of curiosity. Why am I reacting this way? I mean, because we know why we're reacting this way, because obviously you're the problem. The other person is the problem, or this situation was like this. And we're sure that we understand these things and they are our truth. With that kind of a consciousness, that undifferentiated consciousness, that's what reality seems to be to us at that point in time. Well, as we start to wake up and we start to now realize that, my God, that there's another way of being in this world. There's another way of showing up. And we start to live a more consciously based life. We start to cultivate our awareness. We start to increase our awareness. We start to experience a curiosity that may have laid dormant. In fact, we maybe for the first time in our life, we become interested in ourselves in a very different way. Maybe in a way that we've never been interested in ourselves and who we are and what it's going to take for us to grow ourselves. And then in the third, insight, I say we start to discern the degree to which we're emotionally dependent. And we start to become aware of how strong that emotional dependency determines how we show up in our life, determines our habitual way of thinking about relationships, our habitual way of reacting to relationships, our habitual way of feeling in relationships, and creates a certain kind of pattern in our relationships. We begin to see clearly how that consciousness shapes our behavior and all of these ways that we show up. Well, now that we become aware of this emotional dependency, the fourth insight is knowing it's not personal. We now come to know that what other people do is not about us. But it takes some work to get there, because you can see our first reaction is to take things personally. This is what I say in the book. I say taking things personally means we assume that things other people say and do or don't say and do are about us rather than them. We all take things personally. It's a hard habit to break, but a habit that must be broken, Bill would say, and broken at depth, right? That's how Bill likes to describe it. A habit that must be broken if we are to achieve emotional sobriety. This is what Fritz Perls says. He says, our dependency makes a slave out of us, especially if this dependency is a dependency of our self-esteem. If you need encouragement, praise, pats on the back from everyone, then you turn everyone into your judge or everyone into your parent. That's the hook, right? That's the dependency. This is Dr. Marion and Irv Polster, also first generation Gestalt therapist. And they say this, which really I thought was a brilliant observation. They go, if our freedom, our emotional freedom, depends on exclusively on another person allowing it, we lose our own sense of the part we must exercise in protecting and defining our own psychological space. See, the more dependent I am, the more passive I become in my relationships. The more I'm dependent on you doing, quote, the right thing, which once again, I'm going to say that's synonymous with doing what I want you to do. To me, that's what the right thing is for me to be okay. And so if my emotional freedom depends on you allowing it, then I'm always connected to you and your goodwill for my well-being. This is Don Miguel Ruiz, and if you have not read his book, The Four Agreements, I would strongly encourage you to put that on your recovery shelf. It's an outstanding book. He's got many important insights that fit so nicely with emotional sobriety. And this was his second agreement, is do not take anything personally. He says this comes from this sense of personal importance, right? Or the all about me syndrome. This sense of personal importance or taking things personally. He calls it the maximum expression of selfishness, because we make assumptions that everything is about me. Well, where do these assumptions come from? Well, it's very easy to see. If you are around small children, young children, it's all about them. They can't even, if you're in a conversation with someone, they don't even know to wait a minute before they interrupt the conversation. Mommy, 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 or daddy, 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 daddy. And you have to say, wait, hold it, honey. I'm still talking over here. Now, hopefully a parent will set that boundary. Some parents will just turn to their child and start interacting, which is reinforcing the it's all about me syndrome. Well, it doesn't need to be reinforced much, because every child is egocentric. It is all about them, because their consciousness cannot now embrace others. That doesn't come until much later in life. So their brain hasn't developed along those lines yet. Now, hopefully, and this rarely happens, parents, as the child grows, will start to incorporate the other in the child's consciousness. But, what do we call it now? In America, we have what's called the affluenza syndrome. And what that is these kids now are just given everything they want. And what that does is created an unbelievable level of entitlement in our culture today that is really, really wreaking havoc with these kids developing in any kind of solid way. You know, our relationship with others becomes such an important thing in terms of living a happy and successful life. And if this, you know, sense of personal importance is dominating our consciousness, it's going to be very hard to make room for somebody else. The way I like to say it, in a healthy relationship, there's room for two people. There's room for you and room for me. It's not just room for my rules about how you're supposed to be, but my emotional dependency demands that you adhere to my rules, and there's no room for you. And that's what we're trying to grow ourselves through with emotional sobriety. So taking things personally is a function of our low self-esteem. You know, our self-esteem, our low self-esteem makes us very focused on and concerned with approval and disapproval of other people. Now, it's a very funny thing. And if you've been in the Thursday night meetings, we talk about it, and Tom Rutledge points this out all the time. Isn't it amazing that even though we have low self-esteem, we make everything about us? It seems like such a paradox, doesn't it? We're egomaniacs with inferiority complexes. I mean, it's unbelievable. But those two things exist because we do make everything about us, and it is influenced by our low self-esteem. As we grow ourselves in this direction, we aren't going to need to do that. In this way, emotional dependency creates that reflected sense of self that Dr. David Snarch, defined, meaning that we believe that the other person's behavior and attitude towards us is an accurate reflection of who we are rather than expression of who they are. Now, you see, when our consciousness is undifferentiated, we become fused with the other person, and how they're treating us becomes how we're defined. Or another way of saying it is the way they treat us defines us. Because we're undifferentiated, we can't separate ourselves from them. So we become fused with them. And that's what makes this such a challenge. We see in their actions and statements a reflection of our worth or our value. We view their behavior as a mirror in which we see a reflection of our worth or our value, their approval or disapproval of us. We lose sight of who we are because of what they say or how they act. So, how do we deal with this mess that this creates? And it does create, it makes relationships incredibly sticky and incredibly fragile, because if things don't go the way we think they should go, we're going to have one of three reactions. We're going to move against the person and attack them, let them know how bad they are and how much they've failed as a friend or partner. And my God, their mother really screwed them up, or their father did. And if they were a healthy person, of course, they would do things the way they should do them, which is the way I want you to do them. Or we say, oh, I'm so sorry. I won't be like that again. Please give me another chance. And we double our efforts to be pleasing, trying to become everything they want us to be so that they'll treat us nicer next time. The third option is we say, forget you. I don't have any room for toxic people, and we cut them off. We withdraw from the relationship. We end the relationship. All three of those things are part of the problem. They are reactions. They are not actions that move you to grow yourself up. As you're going to see, the action that we can take to grow ourselves is to stay connected during trouble, not to get alienated from the person we're struggling with, and to add more of ourself. That'll make more sense as we talk about it today. This is Dr. Jerry Greenwald. He was part of that first generation of Gestalt therapists after Fritz. And he goes, it's not possible for me to relate to others intimately. Now listen to this, and allow and enjoy their full expression of themselves if I have not discovered how to do this for myself. If I am still having to live according to what I like to call the tyranny of my shoulds, if I'm controlled with what I should be doing and how I should be doing it, then I'm not going to leave room for you to be yourself, because I can't be myself. We cannot. What did I say before was the golden rule? Remember it? We treat other people the way we treat ourselves, right? That's what we do. So if I've got all these shoulds for myself, you can rest assured, I'm going to put those shoulds on you. And I'm going to have a bunch of shoulds on how you're supposed to behave. If I can start to enjoy my authentic self, who I really am, and allow and give voice to what's really going on with me freely, then I'm going to be able to encourage you to do that too. I'm not going to need to control you and what you say, because I'm not going to take what you do personally. The only way to get to what Dr. Greenwald is saying is to unhook our emotional dependence and to be able to own it. I love this quote by Dr. Satir. We must not allow other people's limited perceptions to define us. We must not allow their limited perceptions to define us. And they're limited, because nobody knows what's really going on with me. I know what's going on with me. You don't know what's going on with me. You may have some sense of it, but you don't really know. I'm the only one that knows. This is Dr. Murray Bowen and Dr. Michael Kerr. Dr. Bowen is the psychiatrist responsible to bring this concept of differentiation into psychiatry. And Dr. Michael Kerr was one of his students and has now, picked up the baton, much like I have for Dr. Kempler's work, and has carried it on. And this is what they said in their book that they wrote together, that the individuality of well-differentiated people is developed to the point that they can be responsible for themselves and not fault others for their discontent, for their own discontent. I mean, really take that in. The individuality of a well-differentiated person, or you could say the individuality of an emotionally sober person, individuality of an emotionally mature person, is developed to the point that they can be responsible for themselves and not fault others for their own discontent. So if I'm taking something that you're saying personally, when I'm operating from this kind of a consciousness, I look at what I'm doing, not what you're doing. I get curious about the meaning I'm giving to what you're doing and what is making me take it personally. Is there a part of me that agrees with you? Like if Susie was to say, you're stupid, Alan, you're just stupid. You've given this talk so many times, you're not saying anything new. It's just stupid. When are you going to start to do something better than this? My God, I'm embarrassed to have you here. Not that Susie would ever talk to me like that. But if
wait a minute. I was thinking, why didn't you say that to me 40 years ago?
That's right. Right. But if she did say that to me and I took it on and I go, ow, that hurts. That hurts. There would be a part of me that agrees with Susie that I'm stupid. I tell everybody I've gotten a lot smarter now that I realize how stupid I am. So Susie could call me stupid and I'd agree with her. I'd say, God, yes, some of this material is old. I'd like to find out some new ways of doing it. Do you have any ideas? I wouldn't have to defend myself. Herb and I like to call it, we take a posture of being undefended. I don't need to prove that I'm smart or that I'm not stupid. I know that I'm stupid and smart. I have both of those in me. I can be stupid and I can be smart. I mean, I have both possibilities. But you see, if I know that, then I don't need to manage Susie's impression of me. And if I get upset about it, I can say, wow, you're still not owning that. Look, you reacted to that. There's still a part of you that doesn't want to fully own that you're stupid. Let's get to work on that. instead of saying to Susie, how dare you talk to me? Don't you know who I am? I'm Dr. Berger. as though that's supposed to shut her up, right? And prove that I'm smart. Doesn't prove anything. It proves that I went to school for a long time. That's all. And that I worked hard to try to figure some of this stuff out. But you guys get that. I hope you can see that through that point, what it means and what the reaction would be. So nothing anyone says to us or how they behave towards us is personal. They say and do what they say and do because of who they are, not because of how they feel about us. See, this is that it's all about me syndrome again, right? I have low self-esteem, but of course, everything's about me, which is so crazy because you think with low self-esteem, I wouldn't think anything's about me. But I think that you're thinking about me all the time, which means I'm so important. That's the personal importance. Instead of taking what others are saying personally, we need to ask ourselves, what am I learning about this person? Or the other question, if I am emotionally upset, how do I agree with this person? What part of me agrees with what they're saying to me? See, those are the two ways of getting out of this. Is if you're upset, to get to work on identifying what it is that's upsetting you and not faulting them and now dumping it on them that they shouldn't talk to you this way. But if you react, you've got to understand, we call it a projective fit. Where is that projective fit taking place? The other thing that I can say to help me unhook myself from what Susie is saying is, what am I learning about this person? There must be something going on that's making, let's say in this example I gave, Susie react that way. And if I don't take it personally, I might be able to be there for her and say, God, I'm curious what's going on underneath all of that energy. And you need to point that out to me right now. Don Miguel Ruiz, in that chapter of the book, he says, you are never responsible for the actions of others. You are only responsible for you. And when you truly understand this and refuse to take things personally, you can hardly be hurt by the careless comments or actions of others. Nothing others do is because of you. What others say or do is a projection of their own reality, their own dreams. I call it expectations. When you are immune to the opinion and action of others, you won't be the victim of endless suffering. You neutralize that. You're differentiated from others. You're not fused with them. As you stop taking things personally, you won't need to place your trust in what others say or do. You will only need to trust in yourself to make responsible choices. And this is the thing. If you are so dependent on others, you're going to put an inordinate amount of emphasis on being able to trust somebody. But when you get to this point, you're going to realize that you got to start by trusting yourself, not others, or else you're going to set yourself up. So here's the protocol that I'd encourage you to think about. So you got to depersonalize the energy. Remember, it's not about you, it's about them. But sometimes to depersonalize the energy, you have to ask yourself, if you are reacting, what part of me agrees with them? And get to work on dealing with that part of yourself. If you aren't, if there isn't a part of you, then the first thought you have is that this is not about me, it's about them. If you become reactive or defensive, once again, go through the checklist. Am I agreeing with them? And then if you're not, remind yourself that what they are saying or doing is about them, not about you. Ask them questions that you can develop a deep understanding of their felt experience. God, Susie, what's going on today? This seems, unusual for you to talk to me in this way. What's happening? Is something going on? Did I upset you? And did I do something I'm not aware of, or something else is going on? Or is there something you want from me that you're having a hard time of asking for? I'm interested in what your experience is. So we show a genuine interest in what the other person is struggling with. You're not going to solve their problems. You're going to allow them to explore their own feelings and to repair themselves. You're going to soothe yourself. If you begin to feel anxious in the interaction, you're going to own your own experience. You're going to try to put yourself in their shoes. You're going to empathize with them. I'll leave that up for a minute in case you need to copy those down. You can take a picture of it with your phone. I do, after a week or so, send these slides in a handout form to Patrick, and he usually posts them on the WhatsApp site. Well, there's my mentor. There's Dr. Kempler. I miss him a lot. Brilliant psychotherapist, brilliant man. He goes, in order to be more personal in a relationship, you need to stop taking your partner's behavior personally. I love that. To be more personal, you have to stop taking what they're doing personally. It's only then can you really see and experience who they are. And back to what Dr. Greenwald said, is to be able to allow and enjoy their full expression of themselves. You can only do that if you're doing that for yourself as well. Don Miguel says it this way: when we really see other people as they are without taking it personally, we can never be hurt by what they say or do. So there is at 4D PhD, an emotional sobriety study area. For a nominal fee, you're able to access all of my talks that I've recorded. I've got DVDs on there. I've got a whole day workshop I did with Herb, the audio recordings on there, all kinds of other talks on self-hate, on directions, the change and recovery. It's a great collection of a lot of good recovery resources. But the real cool thing about it is now there's a once a month you meet with me, and once a month you meet with Herb in a small group, and we discuss aspects of emotional sobriety. You can ask Susie about those. She's been attending those, and I think they're we get to go in depth on some very specific things, and it's usually a small group of people, so you get to really address some of your questions more personally. So if you're so inclined, please come and join us. There's also the Thursday night meeting. That's an open meeting, and this is how you get in touch with me.